All right, so here's some tips for you. Again, when you're cutting, you want to keep those tips of the flame an 1/8 inch off the metal to a 1/2 inch off the metal. We're never going to touch the cutting tip to the metal. If you're getting lots of dross on your cut, you want to do less oxygen or move fast. Somehow you're getting it too hot. So you can also turn down your acetylene a little bit and then move quicker. Oxyfuel is has a lot of pros and cons to it, but the number one is that it's very portable. You can take this system out into almost any field and cut any oxidizing metal. Oxyfuel is a chemical reaction where we're actually rusting or oxidizing the metal. We're not just melting metal away and causing it to disappear. It's actually an oxidation, so it's a chemical reaction between the oxygen and the iron in the steel. And so we can cut cast iron and steel, but we can't cut aluminum or stainless steel because those metals don't oxidize, all right? They don't react with the oxygen the same way cast iron and steel does. So I would just get a chunk of this 3/16 metal, maybe a 4-inch chunk, that's however wide the sheet is, and cut 4-inch strips, just like I did here, and try and cut up just one plate. We'll get a good, if you get a good cut, we'll sign you off and you can start on your project. The reason why, again, we set our settings that we did on oxygen, I'm going to set this about 18 for 3/16. And for acetylene, I'm going to set it about 4, maybe 3 or 4 for acetylene. And as I go thicker, or if I were to get a larger tip diameter, I would go higher up on those settings. And there's a chart. And if we read this chart, it'll tell us on the thickness of metal that we're cutting and the size tip we're using, what we should set our oxygen pressure to and our acetylene pressure to based on the material thickness and the size tip we're cutting. Now, you may not need to change your tip out for every material thickness, but the settings, I feel like, are really important. All right, some other safety things before we wrap up. Make sure you will always, when you're done cutting, turn off your acetylene and your oxygen so we're not dumping combustible and flammable gases out into this bay, all right? Just make sure that if the cut goes out and you need to start again, turn off your oxygen up here. Your acetylene should be going. If you can grab your striker quick enough, you can get it lit up and then reintroduce the oxygen. Don't try and relight your a flame that has gone out with the oxygen still going. It typically doesn't work, okay? If I'm sitting here like this, nothing, but if I do this and then I add my flame, then we're good, okay? When you're done for the day, make sure you wrap up your leads, make sure you empty the bins, bleed the lines, turn off the torch. Find all the strikers that we have that day, set them in the side of the tables here so we can use them. Your soapstones, set them in the side of the table here. Your tip cleaners you can put in the back of the box on the torches on the cart. When you set your torch down, put it down in a way where it's not going to fall. These are made out of metal, but they are delicate in a way that there are some fine pieces of equipment, and if you start using them as hammers, they're not going to work very well. So we want to treat them delicately, even though they're built to withstand all this heat. Dropping them will ruin the tip, can ruin some functions inside the torch. So we want to try and set those down in a way where they're not going to fall. When you light your flame, always make sure you know where you're pointing. If there is something that is going to melt or burn in the direction that you're going to point this, it will melt and burn. So especially these helmets, these face shields get laid on like this. Never set them down like that because they become a dish for tons of sparks, but then they get all scratched up. If this rim down here gets scratched up because it's on the table, it doesn't matter. We want to keep this nice and clear so we can see through it. So make sure that you set those down properly. Make sure that when you're lighting your torch that you're not facing it towards somebody who's next to you also cutting. Make sure the torch isn't facing towards the regulators or the hoses that you're using. Just make sure that you're aware. I try and make sure that it's lighting straight down into the table. And then get rid of that flame again and start it. Just know where it's facing at all times so you're not setting things on fire, including yourself. Hopefully you're that aware. When you empty the bins out of this at the end of the class period, they will be hot, right? It will be hotter than normal. Make sure you use your gloves when you go to dump this into the scrap pile. Anything that you have cut that is still able to be cut, you could leave that in a pile here on the table for the next person to come use, so we're not wasting good metal to practice cutting on. All right, if you also don't want to wait in line at the shear, you can always dig through the scrap bin and cut any scrap metal apart. Know that the final project for the term will be on 3/16, so that's kind of what you should practice on, but we can cut any thickness. Oxyfuel can cut very thin sheet metal all the way up to several inches and even feet thick with the right setup. While our setup is good for thin, 1/8 inch, 14 gauge, all the way up to about 1/2 inch, 3/4, 1 inch, we could probably push it. Good luck with oxyfuel cutting and try not to set yourself on fire.